Welcome to the Book Flood Podcast. I am your host, Tom Nixon. My guest this week is Armida Espinoza. Armida is a first generation Mexican American who has faced many challenges that second language learners endure today. Through her writing, Armida aims to validate the experiences of second language learners and help all children conquer their fears and insecurities about learning. Armida is the author of Brave Lolis Learns English and Brave Lolis Box of Hope. Welcome, Armida.
Thank you, Tom, for having me.
Oh, absolutely. I'm excited. Armida is local to me. That doesn't happen too often. Why don't we start by you telling us about your journey toward becoming an author?
Sure. Well, I was born and raised here in Fresno, and I'm first generation. So my parents were from Mexico, and I'm the youngest of six. And so I had a pretty typical childhood. I'm a product of Fresno Unified, went to Lincoln Elementary School, and I always tell folks, my parents unfortunately did not have the opportunity to be educated, so they did not. They worked in agriculture, but I never felt poor. I had a warm bed to sleep in at night. I had food on the table and loving parents, and we were very fortunate to have a lot of the social services that were available to us, which we took advantage of. For example, food stamps, public housing. And so we're just very lucky to have that services available to us because of the fact that that really helped us, pulled us through a lot of difficult times. But anyway, my childhood was very normal. And so I am a retired teacher. And my first degree was in sociology. Then I have a liberal arts. And then I went into teaching and, of course, have my master's. Retired. Uh, God, it seems like just recently, but it's really been 4 years ago that I retired as an educator from Golden Plains Unified. So that's a little bit about my background.
How did being a teacher affect you wanting to be an author?
Well, I got to tell you, I'll be honest, never imagined that I would be a writer, that I would be an author. That was never on my radar. But after retiring, I had always liked writing. And so I had always written, but just for myself. The only person that got to read my writing was my husband, because after 40 something years of marriage, he always liked everything I wrote. A good husband. And
Absolutely.
yes. And so, but after I retired, I thought, I'm going to hide away in my little cocoon and just write my little heart out. And I would be perfectly happy and content with that. Interestingly, it was during the COVID that I retired. And the thought occurred to me, I thought, maybe I should take a class on children's writing. I'd never taken any classes along that line. So I took a class, and one thing led to another, and they encouraged me to publish. Although the story that I had decided to publish, because I thought if there's going to be one story that's going to be in print, it's going to be a story that involved my mother, who had passed away. And of
Hmm.
course, it was very dear to my heart. And so I thought, this is going to be the story that's going to be published, that I'm going to publish as a self-publisher. Unfortunately, the editor that I was working with had a lot of questions about the story. The storyline. She just kept finding issues with it. And after 2 months of us going back and forth, I had to ask myself, maybe this is not the story that I'm supposed to be writing, that maybe the universe has something else in mind for me. And I started meditating and just kind of I pushed that story aside, and I just thought, okay, whatever comes to me, that's the story that is supposed to be working on. And interestingly enough, the one memory that kept popping up was a memory that I had in first grade. And I thought I had gotten past that. In fact, I hadn't even thought about it until I started contemplating what would be my story that I would be putting out there to the public, which was a scary thought. But in any event, the experience was that first day of school, first grade, the teacher called me back to the kidney table And you would probably remember this, Tom, when they would test you, right? And so, because that's what first grade teachers do, which I was a first grade teacher, so I did that a lot. But anyway, she called me back to the kidney table in the back of the room, and she had me recite my ABCs. Pretty simple, you would think. However, I got stuck at G. And the worst thing about that moment was that the alphabet strip was right above her head.
Uh-oh.
Typical first grade class, right? And I
Right.
knew that it was there. But I also knew that she was looking right at me and I couldn't sneak a peek. And so I kept thinking, oh my God, so the longer the delay, the more nervous I got. And to the point where she eventually said, thank me for trying. And she was very sweet about it. And then she dismissed me back to my desk. The embarrassment and the shame that I felt at that moment just came flooding through because I remember feeling ashamed, embarrassed, thinking I was the only one that didn't know my ABCs. And then now the teacher was writing something on her paper, and now everybody would know that I wasn't smart. And
Oh,
that
wow.
moment, after I wrote this book and I started going to the schools this past year, and I've read my book to thousands of children, all the dots started coming forward, or I started connecting all the dots of my experience. And so actually reading this book has become and writing it has become very therapeutic for me because all of a sudden I saw in such clear vision as to what transpired that day and how it changed the trajectory of my life.
Hmm.
That one moment. So such a simple moment that we think, children are resilient, they'll get past it. And I didn't get past it. And it never occurred to me. But what I did was I remember thinking to myself, what do I need to do to not be in that position again? Now, I didn't have any understanding that education or learning was incremental. I just knew I didn't know. And so I created a safe space for myself. I decided to be quiet, to not raise my hand, to not draw any attention to me, which so many of our children do to this day, and just learn what I could on my own. I didn't want the teacher to know further that there was more stuff that I didn't know. I didn't ask my friends because I didn't want them to know that I didn't know. And here, this little mind of mine is just going to work, right? And trying to cover all my bases.
Well, and unfortunately, as a former teacher myself, you were well behaved, you were quiet,
Right.
and so it just passed you right by all that education.
Yes, yes. And times are different then. Now, I mean, nowadays we have so many instructional tests and assessments that we give, and we monitor. Parents are very engaged in the school, and it's a whole different relationship, not only with the teachers and the students, but with the parents and the family. And now there's teams that are assessing students and monitoring them. Big difference from when I was going to school in the 60s. And so what I did, as I said, I just knew that I just had to be quiet and stay under the radar and not get into trouble. And I did that. I did that the whole year, first grade. Well, what happened was not only did it become comfortable for me and safe because I'd created this little world, now I was academically behind by the end of first grade because I only learned what I could on my own. So going to second grade, I had no choice but to stay in that little world that I had created. And then every year I got further and further behind. Now, like I said, this did not come to fruition. I didn't realize this until this past year that I thought, oh my God, every year I kept falling further and further behind academically. I got by. I was a C average. I probably graduated from high school. Luckily, they didn't have an exit exam because I probably would not have gotten my diploma, but I probably was reading at third, fourth grade level. I got really good at staying under the radar when it came to language arts. I'll admit, I cheated when I could. because I needed some validation that my answers were correct. And what was really interesting, I always made sure that I sat around smart people.
Interesting.
I didn't cheat too much because I didn't want to draw any attention to myself. I had to just enough to get through and do what I had to do to pass. So every year I kept falling further and further behind academically. And and then it just got to the point where there was just no turning back. I just had to stay there, and in my mind I'm thinking I need to stay here and just get out of high school, be done with it, and let that be behind me.
And should any of our listeners be thinking otherwise, this is not a unique story, particularly with English learners. You mentioned the exit exam, the two groups who, by the end, because they've given you the exit exam 400 times by the end of high school when they still had it, special education students and English learners.
Yes, exactly. And you know what I found? Even though I was a second language learner, I don't know if that was my issue as much as um, it was just a little world that I had created of what I needed to do to survive and to stay under the radar.
Right.
And so, what I found this past year is that this story is not just about English learners. This story is about every child that is challenged. We are
Interesting.
lifelong learners, even adults. And in learning as children, learning as adults, we will all, whenever we're challenged with something that we don't know, there is going to be that little negative voice that's going to pop up and it's going to say to you, this is something you can't learn. Even as adults, I'm trying to learn how to play piano. I sit down in front of the piano and that recording just comes on immediately. Like, give it up. You're never going to learn how to play piano. You should have done this when you were younger. This is not going to work. And I have to, and now I think to myself, we have to talk to children about how do we handle that negative voice at an early age? All children, not just English learners, but all students, because they are all being challenged. And when I read my story, and at the end of the story, I always ask students to raise their hand, or if they wanted to, if anybody have any felt like Lolis, hands go up. English learners, English only learners, their hands go up and they start talking about their fears. They start talking about the fact that they also hear that little voice in their head, right? That this is something you're not going to be able to learn. And so my message is, my call to action is, we need to talk to children about that subject matter as young as we can, as the youngest age as possible, because they
Right.
are all going to have that voice. And we as adults owe it to them to say, hey, I have that voice in my head too. And this is what I do. I switch it, right? I change it to something positive, something to build me up, to give me confidence, to push through. And so that's my mission has become. And all of this came from reading the book and talking about it. And it surprised me that as I said, I just thought that experience was behind me.
So you have taught many English learners. When you're writing the book, do some of those names and faces come back to you?
When I wrote the book, quite frankly, it was all my emotions that were there, right? What I experienced.
Right.
But I know for a fact I saw it in so many of the children that I work with. I saw that fear. I saw that effort to try to stay under the radar. I saw that. I saw that happening with a lot of my students. I was going to say, the interesting thing about it is, so here I thought that I just wanted to get out of the high school scene and
Right.
get a job, and I would be happy and content in life. That was my vision. Luckily for me, I met a young man who now is my husband back in high school. He was a senior, I was a junior. Leonard was fourth generation, and Leonard had his whole vision, his whole world planned out for himself. He knew he
Hmm.
was going to be a teacher, he was going to be a principal, he was going to get his doctorate. And he was very engaged in school. He wasn't, he spoke English very well. And so different backgrounds. And so I remember him, he was a senior, I was a junior. And so he's getting ready to go to college. He went to Occidental College. And I remember him asking me what college was I going to go to when I graduated. My immediate response was, I'm not going to go to college. I'm going to get a job and I'm going to be good. I didn't tell him that I couldn't even imagine going to college because I just got through 12 years of staying under the radar. I was like, I can't imagine going to college. I mean, I'm not smart. Smart people go to college. So, no. But I didn't say this to him. I just said, I'm going to get a job and I'm good. So there's that saying that if who you hang out with really does influence who you are. Like
Right.
tell me who you hang out with and I'll tell you what kind of person you are. Fortunately for me, Leonard and I married, and what I saw was I got a job with the state as a file clerk, and I was a happy camper. And he was at Occidental with all his other friends. And what I would see at night when I would get home from work is him and his friends all struggling with the academics of Occidental, which was it's quite a prestigious college,
Right.
and helping each other and pushing through it, right? And the more I saw that, I thought to myself, wait a minute, it's just not me. They're also struggling. And here I thought that they were smart and I wasn't, but I thought, wow, if they're struggling, then maybe perhaps I could do something, right? More than. And so Leonard had always encouraged me to go to school. And he always said, just take one class, just try it.
Good
So
husband.
good husband. So I took one class and I did something that I'd never done before. I actually tried to read the book. I outlined it. I asked tons of questions. God knows I looked up just about every word in that, those pages in the dictionary because they were all new and I was a low my reading skills were very low. And I had success. And I thought, wow, you know, I could do it. I could possibly do it. And so that put me on the career of getting my degree, and then eventually, as a Leonard was a school teacher, and I was helping him in class. So I would see what he was doing. I was helping him a lot, and I thought, and I would see other teachers, and I was thinking, well, if they could do that, I think I could do it, right? So I started
Right.
changing my own mindset, and that's how I got into education. So yeah, I was this, and like I said, all of the dots just really became started getting connected. The more students opened up about their fears, and the more I started thinking about my own childhood and my whole time in elementary and high school.
That is such a great story. Going from English learner to teaching English learners, a lot of endurance in that for sure. Do you think being an English learner played a role in becoming an author? You wanted to.
No, I mean, like I said, the one story I wanted to publish was the one with my mother. Had nothing to
Hmm.
do with me being a second language learner. But once the those memories started surfacing, then I knew that because so many students are still struggling and will continue, I knew that this is a story that I needed to put out, and the story came together quickly, and the
Mm.
editor loved it right off the bat. And so I thought, okay, this is what the universe was trying to tell me, because quite frankly, opening up and putting myself out there that that I was not smart, and my insecurities throughout my high school years and into my 20s, that's not something that it's easy to put out there.
Absolutely. Brave Lolis won the 2023 International Latino Book Award. What is that? How did that happen?
Yes, well, you submit the books, and of course, thousands of books are submitted, and there's hundreds of judges. But yeah, I was really surprised that because it was submitted under the category of educational children's book,
Mm.
and so and interestingly enough, I just got um, notified that the second book, The Box of Hope, won the same award this year.
Oh, nice.
So I
Congratulations.
thank you. I'm over the moon on that.
And how did you get the idea for the Box of Hope?
The Box of Hope. In 2017, when the hurricane hit Puerto Rico, I actually came home from work one day and I was surfing through the channels and I came across a TV station. It was a Spanish station, and they were showing the devastation in Puerto Rico, and they were putting out the call for help. And this is a true story in that the anchor woman, there was a little gentleman who came down from the other side of the mountain to make a donation. And so she interviews him and she says, "What brings you here today?" And he said he lived on the other side of the mountain where the hurricane had not hit. He knew the devastation that had happened, and he had an extra bag of grain. So he mounted it on his donkey, made the trek over the mountain to where the damage was done. And
Mm,
here he came to donate his bag of grain and hope that it would help the community.
what a lovely story,
I know, I know. Oh my God, I was in tears. So
right?
this Lolis, I put Lolis in that the story where she's watching the news and the devastation,
Ah,
and so she, the conversation. There's a conversation with her mom, and Lolis wants to help, but she's thinking, well, I'm just a little girl, I can't help, but she does find a way to help.
is there a book or series of books from your childhood that still impacts you?
You know, Dr. Seuss was the books that I could read, and so that one book, "Places You Will Go," that one,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's a favorite of mine as well.
yeah, yeah.
Do you have any upcoming books?
I I have a couple of stories. I'm not putting any books out this year, but probably next year I will. And so right now I'm keeping pretty busy with Brave Lolis Learns English, because that's become my mission in life, just to get into the schools and talk to the teachers and the parents and the students, and giving them the opportunity to have a conversation about the negative talk that goes on in our heads. And if we don't bring it to the surface as far as a conversation, our children are still listening to that negative voice.
So, what are you reading now?
Well, I'm going to read. Can I read you one page of my story?
I'm
Yes.
hoping.
Okay, perfect. So the storyline, of course, is Lolis is frustrated, and at this point, she no longer wants to go to school because she's first day of school, she gets stuck at G. The second day, the teacher tests them on vocabulary words. She doesn't know a lot of words, and then the teacher surprises them with the the third day. They're going to be for them to practice their vocabulary words at home, because the next day they're going to have to write three complete sentences
Hmm,
and read it out loud in front of everybody. So you could imagine Lolis is just fit to be tied. She's thinking, just, I can't do this. I cannot do this, and doesn't want to go to
terrified.
school. Terrified, exactly. So her mom sits next to her in bed as Lolis, yells out that she doesn't want to go to school and that learning English is difficult, because the mom is also learning English. And so the mom, in
Hmm,
her quiet voice, Lolis would hear her mom oftentimes repeat to herself that learning English was easy and fun. And Lolis can't understand, why would you say that? Because learning English is not easy and fun. So that's a conversation that takes place with her mom. Sitting on the bed next to Lolis, her mom said, "Learning something new is not always easy." "Why is learning English easy for you?" Lolis asked. "It's easy because I tell myself that it's easy." "Kind of like pretending?" Lolis asked. "Exactly," Mom says. "The more I pretend that it's easy, the easier it becomes." "Well, when does it become easier?" Lolis asked. "As soon as you start believing it. It's not going to happen right away, but it'll happen. You just need to believe." "Well, I'll try," Lolis says. "I'll try." And as she falls asleep, Lolis whispers to herself, "Learning English is easy and fun."
so nice. Well, I want to thank you, Armida, for coming and being on the Book Club podcast. We will have your link to your website in our show notes. And also, folks, please remember to like, subscribe, and share wherever you listen to our podcast. Again, thank you, Armida.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Tom.